Welcome, everyone. So good to always have you join us in learning here at Drisha. Let me just say a few words about today's class. So today's class is the Poetics of Mishnah, Themes and Structures with Rabbi Dr. Avraham Walfish. The class was being taught between Rabbi Walfish and Rabbinite Dr. Adina Sternberg. The remaining classes are to be taught by Rabbi Walfish. This class is part of Drisha's ongoing Mishnah project dedicated to the memory of a great lover and student of Mishnah, Rivka Rosenwein, Zichona Livracha. Just a few words about how we run the class for anyone who might be joining us for the first time. I'll be sending everyone invitations to become a panelist. That would allow you, if you do accept it, it would allow you to participate in class verbally, unmute, ask questions, make comments. It would also allow you to turn on your video if you would like to show us your smiley face. You don't have to. You can also participate by chat here on Zoom or as a Facebook comment if you're watching us live on Facebook. Welcome as well. Please stay muted when you're not actively speaking. I'll help mute you, and just remember to unmute when you do like to speak. And with that, I'll turn this to you, Rabbi Walfish. Let me just, why don't you unmute and I'll make you a co-host. There you go. Perfect. I can't hear you yet.
Okay.
Oh, there you are. Okay, perfect.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Okay, I'm afraid not 100% well yet, so the class will probably still be punctuated by some coughing, but otherwise should go okay. Okay, let me get up the text on the screen. There we go. Okay, today's topic is going to be a little different than previous topics. What we've discussed in the last few sessions is how Mishnah puts things together. It's how different units are joined, and we've focused on larger units, how chapters are joined, how divisions, that's clusters of chapters, are put together, what literary techniques help weave together materials. And we should always recall, Mishnah is not a very tightly redacted document in the sense of everything sort of flowing naturally. Mishnah has a lot of fits and starts. It starts with one topic, jumps to another topic, comes back. The way in which topics are organized is generally not readily apparent. But what we've been focusing on in this course is the use of various literary techniques to give structure, okay, to weave things together, to give structure. And when you notice that structure, then you notice a lot of the ideas that usually are hidden to a greater or lesser extent underneath the surface. That's what we focused on up till now, and what we'll be returning to in the next class when we talk about how tractates are structured. But first, before getting to that large topic, what I wanted to discuss is the way in which Mishnah deploys aggadic material. So first of all, let's define what's halakhic and what's aggadic. Halakhic material, we pretty much understand what that means. It means law. Okay, law in the sense of you have binding directives that are of general applicability, okay, under conditions X, so then the law is Y. The law is chayav or patur. Okay, the law could be tamei or tahor. Okay, but you have a clear directive for any given situation. Obviously, In many cases, you have less clear directives where the law allows for a certain degree of fluidity. Sometimes the law will say it's preferable to do it this way, but it can be done that way. Or sometimes, often, there will be differences of opinion in the Mishnah. All that comes under the legal material, which makes up the vast bulk of the material in the Mishnah. Okay, that's the backbone of the Mishnah, and that's the main topic by far covering the majority. Aggadic material is all the rest. So aggadic material will often be narrative. There can sometimes be halakhic narratives where basically you have a story told whose bottom line is the law was determined to be such and such. That's a legal narrative. Can you have quite a bit of that in the Mishnah? But occasionally you have narratives in the Mishnah that are either non-legal or not only legal. Okay, you'll have a narrative that will sometimes have a halakhic bottom line, but there's so much more going on in the narrative that it's clear that the Mishnah wasn't interested only in the legal bottom line, but in some other message that grows out of the narrative. And in many cases, you'll have narratives that, or I shouldn't say in many cases, in some cases in the Mishnah, you'll have narratives that don't have a legal bottom line at all. It's a narrative usually about a topic related to the halakhic topic discussed in the Mishnah. Sometimes that relationship is not immediately clear and needs to be fleshed out. But usually you can detect some connection between the aggadic and halakhic material. And the message of the aggadic material, again, is not necessarily legal. Okay, the message can be conceptual, moral, spiritual, various levels on which the aggadic material can enhance the halakhic material. And when this happens, question always comes up, what's it doing there? The immediate question is the aggadic material carrying forward an idea that you found in the main body of halachot discussed, or sometimes it might even be in a way subversive, or the Aggadah can be coming in a way to say maybe what the halakha has to say is not the final word on the subject. Maybe there's another dimension of how you should address this subject, the aggadic dimension, let's say the moral or spiritual dimension, which sometimes might even have a message that in a way seems to be contrary to the direction that the halakha is taking you in. Okay, so that's one kind of question to be investigated. And using the kinds of methodology that we've been employing in this course, what we're going to do when we look at an aggadic section of the Mishnah is to investigate, first of all, different literary tools employed by the Mishnah redactor to show you how the halakha and the Aggadah are interwoven. And once again, when you pay attention to these literary connections, so then we can gain a deeper understanding of what exactly the Aggadah is trying to do and how it interacts with the halakhic material. Okay, so again, as I say, aggadic material in the Mishnah is relatively rare, much more frequent in other rabbinic compilations, starting with Tosefta, by the way. Tosefta has much more aggadic material than the Mishnah does, on a percentage basis as well. Both the Talmud Bavli and the Talmud Yerushalmi also have significantly higher proportions of Agadah than the Mishnah does. Nevertheless, the Agadah, when it does appear, can play a very important role. Okay, so I gave you two examples of Agadot in the Mishnah. One of them from Masechet Ta'anit and one of them from Masechet Sutta. And we'll examine these two examples. Okay. We'll also note where in the Mishnah aggadic material tends to appear, and these two examples are good examples for illustrating that as well. So we're starting off with Ta'anit chapter 3. First two chapters of Ta'anit. First chapter is one that was studied last semester. Those of you who were there here last semester might remember Ta'anit chapter 1. Okay, Ta'anit chapters 1 and 2 talk about fast days that were instituted because of drought. Okay, and a whole series of fast days described in the Mishnah in a year of drought. So you carry on a whole series of fast days. Those are described in the first two chapters of the tractate. Chapter 3 broadens the focus of Ta'anit to include, first of all, fast days because of rain, but not necessarily because of drought. And then fast days because of other kinds of disasters or impending calamities that would require one to enhance one's prayers to God by means of fasting. Okay, so that's the main topic of chapter 3. Okay, you may note that one kind of fast day, which is the one most familiar to us, has not appeared in these three chapters, and those are the fast days for historical tragedies. Those are actually described at the end of chapter 4. Okay, but the first three chapters of Ta'anit are all about fast days for present events, for calamities that have begun to occur or are about to occur, and we fast in order to try to ward off the danger. Okay, so it opens with fast days for intermittent rainfall, okay, which interestingly is seen as being in a way more serious than no rainfall at all. And therefore, instead of fast days of increasing severity, as in chapters 1 and 2, we have we immediately start off with the most severe fast days. Similarly, if the rain falls in insufficient quantities, okay, or if it falls intermittently in terms of geography, okay, some places yes, some places no. And then the Mishnah broadens the focus to include pestilence, collapsing buildings. Okay, the next Mishnah talks about blight, mildew, locusts, caterpillars, okay, invading armies, okay, or dangerous beasts, okay. Then we have a statement that there are certain events that are considered to be so dire and dangerous that you even sound the alarm on Shabbat. Now, sounding the alarm, is that part of fasting, or is that something different from fasting? That's a discussion. Okay, but for Gentile troops that have not yet invaded, but are surrounding a city, okay, or a flood, okay, a ship that's tossed about at sea, okay. So these are all of the different expansions of the notion of fasting discussed in chapter 3. And now we come to a story that as we'll see, is not only a conclusion to this chapter, but it's really a conclusion to the whole first 3 chapters. I say it's a conclusion, even though there's another Mishnah afterwards. Okay, so it's sort of 2 concluding Mishnayot to the chapter and the section. Okay, chapters 1 through 3. As I've already indicated, chapter 4 really stands alone as its own set of topics that are quite different from the ones discussed in the first 3 chapters. And the end of a section, or what we've called a division, is a classic place for aggada to appear. Very often at the end of a tractate, you'll have aggadic material. We'll see a good example of that, a couple of good examples of that next week. And very often also at the end of a division, or less frequently just at the end of a chapter. Okay, so here the story of Choni HaMa'agel is placed in a kind of classic position in terms of where the Mishnah likes to deploy its aggadic material. Occasionally it will appear in other places as well, but that's much less frequent. Okay, so here we have the story of Choni HaMa'agel. Okay, the Mishnah gives you a kind of preface to it. Preface is, in a way, really one of the conclusions, probably not the major conclusion from the Choni HaMa'agel story. Okay, so we'll open with that idea. You sound the alarm on account of any trouble, except for an overabundance of rain. Rain is considered to be a kind of inherent blessing, and therefore, even if you're getting too much of it, you can't pray to God to end blessing. Okay, rather strange notion, and I suspect that this notion really reflects the outlook of Choni HaMa'agel more than the outlook of the standard sages of the Mishnah. But let's put that point aside for the time being. So now we have a story that really illustrates this principle, and as I've suggested, perhaps even is the source for the principle. Okay, so let's read through the story. Maseh Shamrulo l'Choni HaMa'agel, okay, hitpalel sheyerdu geshamim. Okay, so this is apparently a year where it hasn't rained, where it will very soon see that we're very late in the season. And they come to Choni HaMa'agel, who's apparently a known miracle worker, perhaps, or prayer for things like rain. So they come to him. They say to him, pray that rain will fall. Amar lahem tsuvach nisu tanurei psachim. He said, take your Pesach ovens and bring them indoors. Now that already indicates that this is around this time of year, right? Because people already have their Pesach ovens at the ready, sitting outside. That's where their ovens generally were, outside in the courtyard. He says, bring them inside, because the ovens were made of clay, and he seems so certain that he will succeed in bringing rain that he says, when the rain comes, okay, it's going to destroy your Pesach oven. So bring them all inside. So we're already very, very late in the season. Pesach basically is the end of the rainy season, and we're very, very close to Pesach as this story unfolds. It's Palel v'lo yardu geshamim. Well, if he seemed very certain that it was going to rain, it would appear that he was a bit overconfident. He prayed, no rain. Me'asa. Choni Amagel, as we will soon see, is not one to give up easily or at all. Agugav Amad Betocha, this is perhaps the source for his name, okay, that he drew a circle around himself and stood in the middle. V'amar lefanav ribono shel olam, banecha samu fneihem alai, shani kiven bayit lefanecha, nishba ani v'shimcha agadol, shenizaz mikan, ad sheterachem al banecha. Your children, okay, have placed their trust in me because I am like a member of your household. Kiven bayit. I'm like a member of your household. I hereby swear by your great name that I will not budge from here until you have mercy on your children. Itchilu geshamim minatfim. So rain began to drip. Okay, so Amar lo kach shalti said, that's not what I'm asking for. Ela gishmei ratzon bracha unedava. Excuse me, el gishmei borot shichinu marot. What I'm asking for is enough rain to fill the cisterns and the pits and the caves. I want a lot of rain, not dripping rain. So it began to fall torrentially. Amar lo kach shalti. No, that's not what I wanted either. Ela gishmei ratzon bracha unedava. I want rain of goodwill, blessing, and graciousness. Yardu ketiknan. So the rain started to fall normally. Ad sheyatzu Yisrael mirushalayim laharabayit mipnei agshamim, until the Israelites started leaving Yerushalayim and going up to the Temple Mount because of the rain. In other words, it was flooding. It was a normal rain, but so much of it was coming that the streets were flooding. The houses were flooding. So people were abandoning their homes and going to the highest spot in the area, which was the Temple Mount. Ba'u v'amru kashem shitpalalta alehem sheyardu, kach itpalel sheilchu lahem. Okay, so they came to him and said, the same way that you prayed that they should fall, pray that they should go away. Amar lahen tzuaru im nimchat even atoim. Said, go and see if the toim stone, which in other sources was a kind of raised up stone that served as a kind of podium, and during the festivals, people would get up and announce that they had found lost items and invite people who might have lost them to come and see if they can make a match. So that was apparently the highest spot on the Har Habayit. And he said, if that's still above water, so then I'm not praying for the rain to go away. But as long as we are not in absolutely life-threatening straits, I am not going to pray for rain to end. You can pray for rain to come, not for rain to end. Shalach lo Shimon ben Shetach. Now, Shimon ben Shetach, we should just know, was the head of the high court at the same time that Choni HaMagel was active. Okay, he was one of the later Zugot. He was a brother-in-law of King Yanai. Okay, so this is around the end of the 2nd century BCE, beginning of the 1st century BCE. That's Shimon ben Shetach. So he is the spiritual leader of the Jewish people. And he sent to Choni saying, Ilmalei Choni ata, if you weren't who you are, Choni, because Rani alecha nidui, I would decree upon you excommunication. Aval ma aseh lecha, but what can I do to you? Shata mitchatei lifnei hamakom v'oseh lecha ritzoncha. Okay, you carry on before hamakom is a name of God. You carry on before the makom, and what does he do? He performs your will, like a son who carries on before his father, okay, as a tantrum. And then the father, what does he do? He gives in. He caves in and gives the son what he wants. And about you, the scripture has said, your father and mother shall rejoice in you, and the one who bore you shall be joyous about you. That's the story. Okay, so first of all, let's analyze the story, and then let's give a little more thought to what role this story is playing within the larger redaction of Tractate Ta'anit, and specifically the first 3 chapters of Tractate Ta'anit. Okay, so first question is, what's our evaluation of this Choni HaMagel? What do you say about it? What kind of person is he? And you give him good marks, negative marks. What do you have to say? No one has any evaluations?
It looks like Ruth said in the chat, he's an Eliyahu type character.
Okay, let me take a look. Okay, he's an Eliyahu type character.
But I would say,
okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Only Eliyahu, like in the sense that he can, kind of force God's hand, in particular with rain, but not Eliyahu, like in the sense that he cares about the people. He seems to. My first thought about him is that he's trying very hard to take care of the people. Where Eliyahu was punishing the people by taking away the rain.
Right. Okay, but
either way, that it's to the degree that it evokes Eliyahu.
Okay, so on one level, Eliyahu really needs to be prompted to go and bring the rain. God commands him to go and bring the rain, whereas Choni does it of his own will. In that regard, Choni seems to care more about the people than Eliyahu. But we can also, by the way, the comparison between Choni and Eliyahu is drawn explicitly in a parallel to our Mishnah in the Gemara. Gemara brings a parallel which explicitly compares him to Eliyahu. But it is important to note the contrasts. And I would contrast him. Yes, Michael.
Well, he's very threatening at the same time. I mean, Shimon ben Shetach, there's a potential threat there. He is to the to the system, and so there's something. He's there anyway. I'm not totally sure where to go with that, but there's something threatening.
Yeah. Okay. Good. You're on to something. Okay. Before I get to your point, I'd like to get back a bit to the point made by Emily about comparing him to Eliyahu. If we focus not on Eliyahu's initially punishing the people and his needing to be prompted, but rather on how Eliyahu actually brings about the rain. So I think we get a contrast in a very different direction between Eliyahu and Choni. And this is going to be a central point in understanding where Choni fits into tractate Ta'anit. Okay, maybe I'll begin with noting something that is glaringly absent in the whole Choni Hamagel story, since we're within tractate Ta'anit. Okay, if you want to bring about rain, what would we expect? He would declare
Tshuva,
fast day, but he doesn't do that. The truth is, halakhically, you're supposed to end the fast days long before we get to this point in the year. Okay, you're supposed to have 13 communal fast days, and that's it. You're not supposed to have more. But there are the Mishnah in chapter 1 describes there are unique individuals who apparently have a lot in common with people like Choni, who continued to fast even beyond that point. We have no hint of that here. There's no fasting here. Not only is there no fasting, a key feature of fast days is for the people to repent, for the people to return to the straight and narrow. There's none of that here. Choni doesn't expect anything of the people. He doesn't demand anything of the people. He doesn't tell them, if you want me to pray for you, put your house in order. Doesn't say that. Says, okay, I'll go and pray for you. Now, contrast that with Eliyahu. What does Eliyahu do to bring rain? Eliyahu performs a very dramatic act to convey to the people that they have to believe in God. Only after the people have said, Hashem hu Elokim, Hashem hu Elokim, does it begin to rain. Now, it doesn't matter how long-lasting it was. I mean, that's an important point to pursue in studying the Tanakh. Just in terms of the modus operandi of Eliyahu, that's classic to Masechet Ta'anit. You want to bring rain, bring the people back to God, and then God will return to the people by bringing rain. Choni does nothing of that. Choni is a one-man show. So that's a very stark contrast between him and Eliyahu. And, at first blush, it would seem a contrast not necessarily to the advantage of Choni. So Choni may have the advantage over Eliyahu of caring more about the people than Eliyahu does, although at the end of the story, he doesn't seem to be that solicitous of the people. When he says, I can't pray for the rain to stop, So at that point, he seems to also, have his, limits of how sympathetic he is to the people. But as opposed to Eliyahu, who does the classic religious act of, you want to bring rain, return the people to God, Choni bypasses that route altogether. Says, I'm just going to pray. But it's not just he's going to pray. Okay, Michael referred to Shimon ben Shetach's very ambivalent attitude towards Choni. And I think Shimon ben Shetach is a mouthpiece here for the narrator. Okay, the narrator also has a very ambivalent attitude towards Choni. And let's start with the negative. What's negative about Choni? Why does Shimon ben Shetach say, had you not been Choni, I would have excommunicated you? What does he do that's wrong?
I want to make sure that you saw Emily's comment in the chat. The Roni story feels like performance.
Yes, the Choni story very much feels like a performance. He's putting on a show. Absolutely. Okay, so that could already be a problem, but I think there are more serious problems. Does Choni really pray?
He doesn't play. He doesn't pray. He whines. He, like you said, he throws a tantrum.
Okay, so now let's present this a little more accurately. At the beginning, he does. It's Palel. He starts off with a standard prayer, but it doesn't work. Standard prayer doesn't work. So now, what would most people do? Most people would either redouble their efforts to do tshuva, to repent, to bring the people to repent, or give up. What does Choni do? That's when Choni starts to demand. First of all, he draws a circle and says, I'm going to stand here until I turn blue in the face. Right? Okay? Tantrum. Here we got it. Okay? And God, incredibly, gives in. But how does God give in? Little drips of rain. Why? Why does God do that? What is God communicating?
The displeasure.
He's saying to Choni, look, I'm going to give you your candy, but not the way you asked for it. Here, take a little bite of the candy, not the whole thing. Right? So Choni said, no, that's not what I wanted. So God starts showering him with candies. No, that's not what I wanted either. I want regular. So then God gives him the regular, but is God happy? Still not. How do I know? Because God seems to not know how to turn off the faucet. He all of a sudden remembered how to turn on the faucet. He didn't remember how to turn it off. God is not happy with Choni, but God is doing what Choni wanted anyway. And Shimon ben Shetach is reacting exactly to that. Why is God not happy with Choni? Because that's not how you pray. This is not prayer, this is demand. Human beings are making demands of God and saying, you've just got to do it. That's it. That's not what prayer is about. Prayer is about you surrender to the will of God. You beseech God to make his will what you want. When you say to God, I ain't leaving until you do what I want, that is not standard prayer. Why in the end does God accept it? That's what Shimon ben Shetach is wondering about. And that's what the narrator wants us to wonder about. Why in the end does God accept this? Well, Shimon ben Shetach gives the answer, but the truth is, Choni already gave the answer at the beginning. And the answer has two parts. And the two parts are based on the same metaphor. I am like a member of your household, says Choni. Okay? Regular prayer is for outsiders. They've got to go through the usual protocols. Okay? Okay? Your wife doesn't have to go through the usual protocols. When she wants something from you, she can bypass the usual protocols and bang on the table and say, this is what I want. Right? That's what a ben bayit does. So Choni starts off according to the protocol, and that doesn't work. He abandons the protocol and says, I'm a ben bayit. But there's also another matter. He says, I'm praying on behalf of your children. Same metaphor, ben. This is ben bayit and this is banecha. You have to tirachem al banecha. Okay, Choni says, because the people have a special relationship with you, and I have a special relationship with you, when push comes to shove, we can abandon the protocols. Yes, the protocols are, you're God and I'm man. And I can't be chutzpahdik when I talk to God. But we're not in a normal situation. We can't follow the normal protocols. And if I am a member of your household and I'm representing your sons, so then to hell with the protocols. Well, God doesn't abandon the protocols so easily, and neither does Shimon ben Shetach. Shimon ben Shetach does not like approaching God in that way. He says it's wrong, it's inappropriate. Even in dire situations, we have to remember that God is God and we are who we are. But Shimon said, what am I supposed to do? God accepted it. Like the child throwing a tantrum, and everybody looking from the outside says, you can't give in to that. And I says, what can I do? He's my son. What can I do? And he gives in. Okay, and that's why the pasuk he quotes at the end of Mishnah returns to the metaphor, a son carrying on before his father. And the pasuk in Mishlei talks about the father and the mother. So what is this story really doing? It's really calling into question everything that Masechet Ta'anit has been doing up till this point. Masechet Ta'anit up to this point has been talking about how to bring rain by following the protocols. The fast days are extreme instruments, but they belong to the protocol. They maintain the proper relationship between God and man. Shimon ben Shetach represents that system. And that's why it's very hard for him to accommodate the likes of Choni. But the Agadah at the end of this section is saying, bottom line, you can reach a situation where the protocols don't work, and then there's room to pull out protexia, to pull out your special relationship, to stretch the protocols, maybe even abandon the protocols. Okay, because bottom line, we have that special relationship with God that enables us maybe in certain circumstances to go beyond the protocols. So the Mishnah says it with a lot of hesitation, okay, with a lot of reservation. But the Agadah puts that on the table and says, okay, we have the halakhic mechanism for how we approach God to bring rain and ward off other calamities. And then, when all else fails, we have the Agadah that tells us that our special relationship with God and people who cultivate a special relationship with God may be a special relationship that on a regular basis abandons the protocols. Okay? So we can go beyond. We can go beyond what the halakha allows for. Okay? This, by the way, is one of the links to the topic of the semester of pietism. And the Choni story is one of the clearest expressions of the ambivalent attitude towards pietism that you can find in rabbinic literature. On the one hand, there's room for it. On the other hand, it's very highly problematic. Okay, let's look at our second example.
Can I just, one comment?
Yes.
Do we have time? Also, when you were describing, it came to mind Moshe at the Egel and his prayers, claims to God that you can't destroy the people, and which are also a certain amount of chutzpah, which are, I think, complete chutzpah there, which again ties in with Elijah. I mean, all those stories tie in together. So
you're right. You're right. So you can see Choni as perhaps not creating a new mode, but taking to an extreme a mode of operation that was already anticipated. You mentioned Moshe. You can go back to Avram Avinu at Sodom, right? Pleading for Sodom. So you can say the foundations are already there with the leaders of the people, with the prophets. But I do think Choni takes it a large step beyond anything that you can find in the in scripture.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah.
So with Moshe and God and God's response. So you look to the story of when Moshe complains, I can't take the people anymore, and I can't I can't feed them anymore. And God says, okay, they want meat, I'll give them meat. And then this is like the too much rain. It's coming out of their noses. So he floods them with the slav.
Okay, good. That's a nice analogy. Thank you. Okay. Okay, well, we'll have to do a rather brief job on Sukkot chapter 2, chapter that deserves a lot more discussion, but I think we'll be able to get to the highlights of what we can see in chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a rather strange chapter, good illustration. If Tani chapter 3 is a good illustration of a well-structured chapter, you can see a clear correlation among the different units. Sukkot chapter 2 seems to be a real potpourri of different sources. The beginning of the chapter focuses on the structure of the sukkah, but for what seems to be a very puzzling manner, it opens with a law about how to dwell within the sukkah. That when you sleep in the sukkah, you should not be sleeping under a bed. Okay, there's some debate about that in the Mishnah. The idea being that if the bed is of a certain height, then the bed is a kind of roof. So instead of being underneath the schach, you're underneath another roof that sort of divides you from the schach. Okay, so you shouldn't be sleeping under a bed. And it concludes with a story to illustrate that principle in a rather paradoxical way. That Tevi, the slave of Rabban Gamliel, slept underneath the bed in the sukkah, and Rabban Gamliel praised him because he said, oh, he's a Talmid Chachamim, so he understands that he is actually not obligated in the sukkah. Probably the idea was Rabban Gamliel's sukkah had a lot of people. Okay, he had a lot of guests, probably a lot of sages who came to study Torah with him and wound up sleeping in his sukkah. And Tavi wanted to be in the sukkah so that he could serve his master and probably the other Chachamim as well. On the other hand, there wasn't enough room for everyone to sleep in the middle of the sukkah. So he said, also, I'll volunteer to sleep under the bed. Okay. And Rabban Gamliel understood that he did that because he realized he's actually not obligated. So someone else will be able to sleep in the sukkah properly. And he, as a slave, will be in the right place, even though he doesn't actually fulfill the mitzvah. So Rabban Gamliel praises him for that. Then there's several other laws that relate to how to structure the sukkah, different, rather strange cases about sukkot that are or are not valid, if structured a certain way. In the middle of Mishnah 4, the Mishnah moves to the topic that will occupy in the second half, which is how to dwell in the sukkah. So it starts off with certain people who are not obligated to dwell in the sukkah, and then with a general rule that you are allowed to eat in the framework of a snack, not a real meal. Arai means nothing, something not fixed, something incidental. Okay, you're allowed to do that outside the sukkah. Only a fixed meal has to be in the sukkah. But if you're just taking a snack, you can do that outside the sukkah. And then Mishnah continues with how one is supposed to eat in the sukkah, continues with others who are exempt from the sukkah, nashim v'avadim uktanim. Note that the exemption of avadim already came up at the beginning of the chapter, and now it comes up again at the end of the chapter. And then the last Mishnah gives us a general rule. All 7 days, a person should make his sukkah the permanent residence and the house the temporary residence. That's, of course, a paradox. The sukkah, by definition, is a temporary residence. But on Sukkot, I make it my permanent residence. That's the whole idea of Sukkot. And my house, I'm allowed to enter it occasionally, but that's not where I'm really living. I'm really living in the sukkah. And then the Mishnah concludes the chapter with a ruling: when it rains, then I am permitted to vacate the sukkah. But when it becomes unlivable. For example, if the dish will spoil. Okay, I have let's say some kind of porridge, and if it rains into the porridge, it'll get all soggy and liquidy, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. Okay, and so I'm allowed to vacate the sukkah. And here's where the aggadic comes again, the end of a chapter, which is also the end of a division. The next chapter moves on to the laws of the 4 species. The last 2 chapters deal with various practices in the temple during Sukkot. And here, at the very end of the first division, the laws of Sukkot, the laws of the Sukkah, we have a parable, which is also one of the aggadic forms. It's a narrative, but a narrative that's designed to symbolize something, designed as a kind of metaphor, an extended metaphor. So the metaphor is the parable. Okay, a slave comes to pour not to pour, we translate it in modern Hebrew as to pour. The literal meaning is to mix a goblet for his master, and his master then pours the pitcher on his face. Okay, now the pitcher is the water. Okay, to mix the goblet means the master is sitting there holding a goblet with wine. The servant, okay, the slave, comes with a pitcher of water to pour water into the goblet, because the water they used to get their wine from the winemaker unmixed. So you have to dilute it before it becomes potable. Okay, so here comes the slave, and what does the master do? The master pours the pitcher on the face of the slave. Wait a second. I thought the slave was holding the pitcher. How does the master get hold of the pitcher? He grabs it, which is an interesting question. Okay, first of all, let's try to understand the parable before we try to understand what the purpose of the parable is here in the Mishnah. Okay, the master clearly wants to express what?
Displeasure.
With
Servant.
the slave. Now, that's one of the big mysteries of this parable, and that's engendered quite a bit of discussion. What is the master unhappy about? And the answer is we don't know. And the parable isn't interested in telling us what the master is unhappy about. Because the point of the parable is not why is the master unhappy. As we'll see, the point of the parable is what is the slave supposed to do now? Okay, we're not told that, but I think that's the point of the parable. The slave comes, okay, he thinks he's doing a wonderful thing. He's about to pour the water into the wine in order to serve his master. His master grabs the pitcher of water and flings it in his face. Now, if the master wanted to express displeasure, he could just have taken the wine in his goblet and flung it in the face of the slave, right? Why didn't he do that?
That's a
Why
waste.
did he have to grab the water? What?
Because that's a waste of good wine.
Maybe, but I think there's a deeper reason. I think the reason is because when he grabs the water, he's making a symbolic statement. The symbolic statement that he's making is, take your water and blankety blanket. This is what I think of your water. You're coming to pour me water. I'm not interested in your water. Here's what I think of your water. Fling it in your face. Okay, now there's actually a parallel to the Mishnah that expresses this explicitly. Okay, the parallel is in a Braita cited in the Talmud, where the master says to the slave, "Efshi b'shi musheich," I'm not interested in your service. The most powerful way of expressing that is by grabbing the water from him. He's not just expressing anger. He's expressing, severance. Saying, I'm not interested in you. Go away. Okay, in modern Hebrew, we'd say, Ufli me'ayinayim. Get out of my sight. That's basically what he's expressing. And now, what is the slave supposed to do with that? So we have to understand one thing. Okay, in the world of the rabbinic parable, when there's a conflict between the master and the master is always right. Okay, reminds me of a sign I once saw in a workplace. The rule of the workplace. Rule number 1, the boss is always right. Rule number 2, if the boss is wrong, see rule number 1. Okay, that's true of the rabbinic parable. The slave can only blame himself. The slave has to slink out of this event and say to himself, I don't know what I did wrong, but I'd better figure it out. Because obviously I did something very wrong. If the master is so displeased with me, then something is very wrong with me. Because there can't be anything wrong with the master. And we see that very clearly when we look at the Nimshal. Okay, because the master is God. God is always right. God is always right. Now, how does the rest of the nimshal work? Who's the slave?
We are.
Am
We are.
Israel. And what is pouring the water into the wine supposed to represent? In the context of Masechet Sukkah, we
Go ahead. Oh.
sitting in the Sukkah, because we're coming right after getting rained out of the Sukkah. When we sit in the Sukkah, we're coming to serve God. And when we come to serve God, we are exposing ourselves to the rain. Because if we didn't want to serve God, the rain wouldn't bother us. We'd be safely ensconced in our houses. The rain wouldn't bother us. There's only one reason why the rain is a problem for us. Because we came to serve God. We came into the Sukkah with a pitcher of water in hand, right, in order to serve God. And when God rained into the Sukkah, he's taking that pitcher of water and flinging it in our faces. Okay, so what does the halakha say about what happens when it rains in the Sukkah?
You have to slink out of the sukkah to get
Oh,
away.
that's not what the halakha says.
Oh, okay.
The halakha says, leave. You're not required to sit in the Sukkah when it's raining. When it's comfortable to sit in the Sukkah, when it's livable, stay in the Sukkah by all means. You're serving God. When it rains in the Sukkah, so then I say, Chaval, I really wanted to do the mitzvah. I can't. So I'll go inside. I'll continue my festive meal inside. That's what the halakha says. And what does the Aggadah say?
You have to slink back into your house and worry about.
The Aggadah says if it rains in the Sukkah, we have to ask ourselves why. We came to serve God and God rejected our service. Why did he reject our service? Why didn't he grant us the ability to serve him? There must be something wrong with us. And that's why God doesn't want our service. So the Aggadah, in that sense, complements the halakha. Okay? It adds a spiritual dimension. The halakha just tells you what to do. Raining? Okay, rule book says, rain, go inside. And continue. Carry on your life. Aggadah says, rain on Sukkot, that's a bad sign. That means that God is showing definite displeasure. Let's remember from Masechet Ta'anit, rain is God's form of communication with man. During the rainy season, rain is a blessing. On Sukkot, rain is a curse. Because on Sukkot, rain prevents us from serving God. And therefore, rain expresses divine displeasure with us. We don't know why, but we've got to figure it out. So this Aggadah confers upon the mitzvah of Sukkah a whole spiritual dimension that seems absent from the halakha. By sitting in the Sukkah, we bring ourselves nearer to God. We open ourselves up to communication with God, which hopefully will be positive if indeed we succeed in carrying out the mitzvah. But if God prevents us from carrying out the mitzvah by raining on us, then by sitting in the Sukkah, we have exposed ourselves to divine displeasure, to God communicating to us how unhappy he is with us and how we have to give some thought to how to make things better. Now, just a couple of points to conclude. The way in which this Aggadah is deployed is hugely interesting. because the slave at the end of the chapter, that's a parable slave, a metaphoric slave, reminds us of the slave at the beginning of the chapter, who is exempt from the sukkah, rather paradoxical, right? And what's even more paradoxical is the slave who fails to carry out sleeping in the sukkah properly gets praised by his master. Whereas the parabolic slave at the end of the chapter, who is making every effort to carry out the mitzvah, is rejected by his master. Okay, so there's some very interesting questions raised here about what it means to be a proper slave. Maybe there's even some kind of hint here as to how we might go about thinking about what we did wrong. What did Tevi do right? And maybe that will give us a clue to what we did wrong. But there's another illusion here, and that has to do with the overall structure of Tractate Sukkah. As I mentioned, the last 3 chapters of Tractate Sukkah are about the 4 species and the mitzvot that we carry out in the Mikdash. One of them is Suchamayim, pouring water onto the altar. Now, when we pour water onto the altar, a special mitzvah in Sukkot, we combine it with pouring wine. That's described in Mishnah chapter 4. Okay, you have 2 cups. Kohen has 2 cups. In one of them, he does a wine libation on the altar, and the other one he does a water libation on the altar, both at the same time. And one time, a Kohen tried to avoid it. There was some sectarian dispute as to whether water libation was actually a proper thing to do. It's not written in the Torah. Sectarians rejected it. They said there's no such mitzvah. So one sectarian priest, instead of libating the wine on the altar, he poured it on his feet. Well, the people watched that and got very angry. So they pelted him with their etrogim. So once again, we have someone who is coming to serve God, does it improperly, and receives an angry rejection, an angry reaction. And again, it has to do with pouring water and wine together. So actually, the mashal, the parable at the end of chapter 2, not only gives you an interesting conclusion to the laws of Sukkah, but it also creates an interesting link between the laws of Sukkah and the laws of what we carry out in the temple during Sukkot. So the parable at the end of the chapter really is like the central linchpin of the entire tractate, linking together all parts of the tractate. Okay, we will conclude with that for this week. Shavua Tov.
Thank you so much. Just a beautiful construction. Please come and teach us again.
Okay, thank you so much, Rabbi Walfish. Rabbi Walfish, could you unshare the screen just so we can see each other at the ending? Is that okay? Perfect.
Can I
Go
can I
ahead,
ask a
Michael.
quick question? Is that okay?
Is that okay with you, Rabbi Walfish, taking a couple questions?
Yeah, fine, no problem.
Okay.
So part of when you were talking about the ambivalence and the tensions, so I guess you're really saying the author of the Mishnah, or the Mishnah equals its author, is precisely displaying those. It's not different, reflecting different groups or different tensions within, but it's the Mishnah itself, however the author of the Mishnah is in himself reflecting those tensions.
Absolutely. when you see these kinds of connections that are drawn between these different elements, I think it's abundantly clear that this is not just a collection of texts collected from different sources, which might reflect different outlooks and different points of view. This is a redactor who's weaving them together. By weaving them together, he's inviting us to think about their interaction. Okay, now in this case, in the case of Sukkah in particular, I think the interaction is particularly complex.
Yeah.
What exactly is each one doing playing off of the other one? But the parallels, to my mind, are unequivocal. That you have a redactor who is inviting us to think about that. And it turns out then that the mitzvah of Sukkah seems to be rather straightforward, is actually somewhat challenging. The Mishnah actually wants us to use the mitzvah of Sukkah as a way of reflecting on some questions, and sometimes really hard questions about our connection with God.
I mean, it's so ironic, it comes right after Yom Kippur. I mean, it's as if we're beginning those themes immediately.
Absolutely. I think that's an integral part of what the Mishnah is trying to do here.
Well, it seems, if I can just say, in this parable, the critique seems if we read it as God's displeasure, God's critique of the Jewish people, it seems to be God's critique very specifically of how we observe the law. In other words, it's a critique of the very project of the Mishnah is engaged in, the details of the law.
That's a possible reading. I'm not sure it's the only reading, because the divine displeasure could be about things that go above and beyond the law.
Right. Correct. I don't mean necessarily that it's a critique of it may not, I'm not suggesting that it's a critique that we have the law wrong or we have the wrong psak. I'm saying that how the role of how we, where the system, almost in, maybe the way the classical prophets regarded, ritual, maybe.
Okay, good, right? And in that regard, it would be similar to what we saw in Masechet Tanit as well.
Mm-hmm.
That the law, as important and central as it is not the sum total of Mishnaic Judaism. And the same way that the prophets, called upon us to observe the law, but not only, okay, to also have an understanding of where the law is coming from and where it's supposed to lead us to, and not just, be fixated on the formalistic law. That's a major role of Aggadah within the Mishnah, okay, is to serve as a similar corrective. Yes, the law is very important, but there's also this other dimension, and we have to think about how the halakha and the Aggadah are supposed to interact.
And we do the same thing on Yom Kippur in the Haftarah. When we read the Haftarah of Yom Kippur from Yeshayahu, yes, that's a rabbinic choice, right? That's not the voice of Yeshayahu only, it's the rabbi saying, this is the choice that they made, that this is what we should read on Yom Kippur.
Right. And but both Haftarot of Yom Kippur really, in different ways, challenge the whole idea of fasting. Is fasting really what this day is about? Right.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Walfish, for another great class. We'll meet next week for, I believe, the last class of this session. And thank you to everyone else for being part of our community here at Drisha. You can learn more about all of our classes and register for other programs on our website, drisha.org. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next time. Lehitraot.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.